And we're live.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Lisa.
Hey, Josh. Hey, everyone. It is a cold evening in the Ozarks.
Yes, it is with a winter storm advisory. We're hunkered down in our respective locations.
Yep.
Encourage everybody to stay safe, be responsible, and don't drive too fast, and
Yep.
stock up on wine and marshmallows. That's what I'm doing. And stay home with your wine and marshmallows.
So if Josh is a little jolly, we know why.
Absolutely, sugar high. Times two. I needed something to cheer me up. We got some dark, dark stuff to talk about.
We do. We do. So where do you want to start?
Oh, well, I'll kick this off with just the sort of the teaser, and then I want to head up to the teaser in relationship to the Ozark connection. Then let's head up to Iowa, and then finish with the scary stuff that has the potential of creating technical difficulties.
Yes.
At the very end. But one, I guess, really our lead in on this for folks who've not weren't with us on Instagram this evening is that, first of all, it's important to understand that the St. Louis area, a good chunk of the St. Louis Metroplex, is geologically within the Ozarks.
Yes.
And because it is the city, the suburbs, and various, aspects of the Metroplex, and people associate the Ozarks with rural mountains, that I think it's very easy for people to overlook or not realize that that is technically part of the Ozarks.
That's true. It really is. It's part of the borderlands on that side.
It is. And consequently, just as we're often talking about the tri-state mining district, how the sort of the ragged tall grass prairie edge of the Ozarks is, of course, in the Joplin area. And we do a lot in Miami, Oklahoma, which Miami is not in the Ozarks, but is clearly within that border region. That in a uniquely similar way, the sort of downtown St. Louis, the surrounding environs, St. Charles, which of course is a beautiful historic city as well, original capital, I believe, of the state of Missouri, that these areas are also part of our Ozarks borderland heritage. And something happened within that borderland space that a lot of people don't realize. So, of course, in jumping into our pop culture, we have a film in American cinema that impacted the genres of horror, of suspense, really impacted how North America, and I would say the West as a whole, viewed paranormal occurrences, particularly in terms of demonic possession. And that film is, of course,
The Exorcist.
Yes. And there is a very, I think, potentially little known and incredible tie between that film, the novel, and St. Louis.
There is. And Peter Blatty wrote the novel. It's a novelization of real events. And so most people really assumed it was entirely fictional. And of course, the book and the movie were set in Washington, D.C. in the 70s. And the child at the center of the exorcism was a young girl. In reality, Blatty he came to write this in a sort of a crossroads of his career. He had been very successful writing screenplays for Hollywood for romantic comedies, sort of, the camp romances, Rock Hudson, Doris Day kind of things in the 50s and 60s, and as well as books. And then the 60s changed and people really weren't watching those kind of things anymore. So he decided I'll do something different. And like most writers, I mean, I do it and I know you do it too. He went back to his folders of interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this article he had come across about an exorcism of a young boy from Maryland. And he had kept it because Blatty was from Maryland as well. And the events occurred in 1949. And the boy is only really identified as Roland Doe. And he and his family became embroiled in supernatural occurrences that took on a demonic form.
Yes.
They sought help from their clergy. They were Lutheran. And there was a blessing and cleansing rite done. I think at one point they did talk to the Catholic diocese in Maryland, but nothing went forward. We're not really sure why. There's different stories why. And as this became more, consuming the family, and a lot of it goes back to there was an aunt who was a spiritualist and had died suddenly and had a lot of money, and family was trying to figure out where her money was. And as the boy was becoming more oppressed and the spirit demon was coming through, family members were even asking where the money was, things like that, which in essence probably invited it more in. And so they decided they needed a break. So they decided to go to relatives, to the boy's aunt and uncle who lived in St. Louis. And for anyone that has watched any of the specials about the Exorcist house, that kind of thing, you see, a very suburban 2-story brick house, suburban St. Louis. And it's always referred to as the Exorcist house.
Yes.
Well, that's actually the aunt and uncle's house. And they did stay there for a while, but none of the exorcism rites occurred there. So that's kind of a misnomer. And how the church got involved was one of Roland's cousins was a student at St. Louis University, which is a Catholic university, and observing what was going on, this cousin went to one of the priests at the university, Father Bowdren, and said, "My family needs help." And ultimately the church authorized Father Bowdren to perform an exorcism. So he's a couple of young priests and a couple of seminary students basically were the team that performed the exorcism rites. And the movie is somewhat good at portraying that this was not, this isn't something that's done in 10 minutes, but the exorcism actually took place over 4 months.
Which is incredible.
It is. It really is. And fortunately, when it was done, the boy had no memory of what had happened, was perfectly normal, and actually went on to become an airline pilot. And is retired now. The priests were not quite as fortunate.
Right. And I think we'll probably, let's save that for the very end, just because for some reasons that we'll also explain shortly. But I think along with this, and we had this brief discussion on Instagram, I want to continue it here and get your thoughts. One of the taglines of, not the tagline of Dark Ozarks is sometimes there are no easy answers. Mm-hmm. And what I think is interesting is we're really applying that to ourselves in this particular episode. Something that you and I have worked, pretty continuously on is education about a lot of paranormal happenings. And since the Exorcist film, sort of the knee-jerk response of public consciousness is that if there is a paranormal experience, it is a demon and it is evil and it is here to possess your soul, and you're done, and you need to
Exactly.
run away in fear. And in so many cases, paranormal events, hauntings, they're not malevolent.
Oh.
In many of them, it is simple coexistence. It is just, shifting your viewpoint a little bit, not bringing your own fear and preconceptions in with you. The Kendrick House is, of course, the place that I always come back to as a location that is extraordinarily active. And yet, if you bring, to me, it is the epitome of Southern hospitality, still happening. That if you do not bring the darkness with you, if you not bring the fear, bring your own resistant confrontational energy with you, that, for lack of a better word, the people who've always been there and are still there, some 150 years later, are going to be happy to see you, pretty much, for lack of a better word, invite you to pull up a chair and sit a spell, and it's all good. Also, human beings, all by our little lonesome, can exhibit extraordinary malevolence, and individuals, who are really quite, to put it bluntly, really horrible people who die, oftentimes for their own fault, in violent death, and then remain, will probably continue to be really horrible spirit in that space. And while that can be concerning, it's also something that you don't want to get too freaked out about.
Exactly. It's like, often it really is like running into, someone that's in a bad mood, or, someone that is kind of a bit of a jerk, that, maybe it's someone you work with or something, someone you deal with, and we all deal with that. And that tends to carry over into the afterlife. So, if that person you work with is kind of a jerk, they probably will be later too, if they hang around.
Right. And I think, it's very easy. People can develop, because the paranormal is something that we can't, really connect with our traditional senses, that it's easy for people to get very paranoid about, bring a lot of their own negative energy into the space, and then get that negative energy back. And we've also seen that at the Kendrick House. I've seen that, even just the limited time that I've been there. Somebody who shows up that, for a variety of reasons, they don't like. And it really is literally no different than if you had someone in your home that you didn't like, who, you perceived as rude or unwelcome, and you would give them the cold shoulder. So much, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a statistically significant percentage, of hauntings are really, they're interesting, they're fascinating, they're nothing to get freaked out about.
Well, I think really the incidents of something being classified as demonic are so minuscule. It literally is kind of like, chances of winning a lottery or being hit by an asteroid or something.
But
It's
not
very
impossible.
It is possible. It does happen, but it's very rare.
But at the same time, what I think is interesting, of course, is this is our own, not easy answer episode, is that this particular subject with the St. Louis exorcism deals with one of those cases that is very much not in the realm of normal paranormal experience.
No, it's not. It is that definite outlier, that definite, this is totally different than, for practically anything you're ever going to experience. And Father Bowdern just happened to be the one to walk in that house and then deal with it. But I think it is important to note for people that it is such a different perception before and after The Exorcist for people.
Yes.
That everything about how spiritualism, paranormal was viewed changed. When that movie premiered in 1972 or 3, people fainted in the theaters, that kind of thing. It was that kind of a landmark. I mean, it's a testimony to how well written it was and how well done the movie was, but it stuck, and for good reasons and bad. It had, and we're still dealing with the after effect of that. But even at that, the movie and the book doesn't tell the full story, and in some ways, the really scary part.
Right, which was left out, and
Right.
a lot of these connections, and we'll come back to this, but a lot of this is through a colleague of yours that I've not
Yeah.
met,
Yeah.
who's authored a great book on the subject.
Yeah.
I want to get the book if it's available.
It is. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere, and it is here. I don't know. Did you
Yeah,
read it? Okay.
Yeah.
Stephen LaChance wrote this, Confrontation with Evil, an in-depth review of the 1949 possession that inspired The Exorcist. And he actually went through the case notes and the diaries of the priests involved and so forth, and really went through step by step. And he also had sort of the distinction of being invited by the Jesuits to actually go into some of the locations where the exorcism took place, and he was really the only one that ever got that kind of access. And so, he had some personal experiences and spoke to people who hadn't spoken publicly about this. And then at the end of this, we'll talk about some of what was revealed in the conclusions.
Yes, along with some really interesting stuff, and of course, we'll see if what happened with us on Instagram repeats itself.
Yes.
So we'll put a pin in that, and then jump over to another case entirely.
Mm-hmm.
that does have a potentially interesting tie with the Ozarks, certainly a tie with Missouri, and that is what I think is it tends to crop up on search engines pretty readily, in terms of haunted locations.
Yeah.
And that is the Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa.
Yes. And when we talked about the Crescent Hotel in Waverly Hills last week as two very iconic and destination sites for paranormal enthusiasts, the Villisca Axe Murder House is comparable to that. It's on that level of interest and notoriety. It's booked almost year round. Gets investigated virtually every day of the year at this point.
Right.
So that's how intense the interest is. And even though Villisca is a little far north for the Ozarks, there is a very interesting connection to the Ozarks in the case.
Yes, very much so. And so just to lay out the case, of course, the home itself, I've not been there. My family is from Southern Iowa, so I really have no excuse, but I've not been there. And the home is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's certainly a standout. Villisca, to my understanding, is a very small town.
A couple 3,000, yeah.
And where exactly is it located? I should already know this, but
It's in um have to think about a map here. The south western portion of Iowa.
yes,
Mhm.
which is again the southern central Iowa is where my family's from.
Yes, it's a little
So
further west.
and I've got yeah, I've got a couple of interesting um, you know, paranormal to semi-paranormal stories associated with you know, my family
Cool.
in that area, but kind of which we might you know get to, but they're not super bombastic, um but let's lay out what in this axe murder case, which was notable. It
Hmm.
was very bloody, multiple victims. What this was 1912, I believe.
June of 1912. The house itself, it's originally a farmhouse, 2-story farmhouse, and built in the 1868. So now it's quite old, um, and 160 years old, something like that. And basically, the Moore family lived there. Josiah Moore and his wife and their 4 children. And this happened, I believe it was a Sunday. They'd been at church for some event, and uh, they came home, and 2 friends of one of the daughters came with them to spend the night. So you had the 6 of the Moore family, and then 2 little girls, and they were in a guest room. And everything was a regular evening. They went to bed. Sometime overnight, the murderer snuck into the house, and actually, the, the 2 little girls that were visiting were in a guest room downstairs, and he went past them. That they determined, I'm not sure how they determined the sequence, but authorities determined that he had gone upstairs. He lit an oil lamp, um, and put it under a chair and turned it down as low as I could. So basically just had a glow. So he had a little bit of light. Walked into the master bedroom, and with an axe, and they think it was the Moore's axe that they think it was from the coal shed. And he swung it so hard that he actually put a hole in the ceiling, and uh, the blunt end, he swung the blunt end down and killed Mr. Moore, then his wife. Uh, they determined they probably weren't even aware what happened. It was so quick. He then went and killed the 4 more children, went downstairs, killed the other 2, then went upstairs. Then he went through again, they think, and basically bludgeoned them all, the heads, to the point that they were not recognizable. Then went through and sort of almost a ritual. Of course, serial killers often have rituals. Covered all of their faces, um, and then covered the mirrors with cloth, and some of them put a piece of glass in the cloth, and went to the kitchen, and they think he actually ate something. They took a pound of bacon out, wrapped it up, and put it on the floor. They don't know why, but they think he was there several hours, and then left. And then later in the morning, a neighbor decided to investigate, because they had noticed that there was no activity at the house, and there usually is, family of 6. And walked in and found the little girls and the called the police, and then they found everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there were it's funny, the town ended up dividing along religious lines of what they thought happened, but not in the way you might think. The people that, let's see, the Moors were Presbyterian, I believe, and the Presbyterians believed that a local businessman by the name of Jones either did it or probably hired someone to do it because he was mad at Mr. Moore. And then I believe the other main church in town, I want to say was Methodist, so they kind of fell between the Presbyterians and the Methodists on what they thought happened. But Jones had a grudge against Moore because Moore had used to work for him in a farm implement business, and he was his best salesman, and he left and started a rival business, and apparently was doing well. And then there was accusations that Mr. Moore had an affair with Jones' daughter-in-law. Although, you know, it never was established for sure, but there was gossip. So you had that story.
Mm-hmm.
And then it really wasn't, and then there was something more definitive until several years later it came out that they accused a local pastor by the name of Kelly, he was Lynn George Kelly, of doing this. And it's about 3 years later, I believe. And he ended up confessing, saying he did it, that God had told him to do this and told him to get the axe and do this and so forth. And part of the problem was that he weighed about 115 or 20 pounds, something like that, was 5'2", and there was question of whether or not he physically could have done the damage he did, and certainly he wasn't tall enough to swing the axe to hit the ceiling the way it was. And so he was tried for the murders, but it became very apparent that there was mental illness going on, and I guess some of his statements didn't make any sense, and they acquitted him. And but and so the case is technically unsolved to this day, but there are those who believe that that case, as well as several others in the Midwest, from Illinois to a couple in Kansas and Missouri and maybe Arkansas, may have been committed by Henry Lee Moore. Ironically, the same last name, but not related. And he was from Missouri and had had history of violence, history of perhaps mental illness, and he tended to ride the rails. And they did place him in the vicinity of several of these murders, and they all occurred within about a year and a half, at about the time that they occurred. And they never could prove that he was in Villisca, but the railroad that he tended to ride went through there, and a work crew had stopped there a day or two before. And there was some testimony that, you know, a hobo had been on the train and hopped off the train. So he ended up later that year, this was June of 1912, in December, his own mother and grandmother were killed in Columbia, Missouri. and he was convicted of those murders.
And was his in that case, did he use an axe?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes. And so some people think that he committed all these murders, and some people think he didn't commit any of them other than his mother and grandmother. And that they look at, well, he stood to inherit their houses, although I've never found anything that would indicate that that was really his motive, other than just an explosive temper. And some of these other cases, details were very similar to the murders of his mother and grandmother. So, it really does make you wonder. And once he was arrested, there were no other of these similar axe murder cases in the Midwest.
mm-hmm.
I've even read some people have connected him as a possible suspect in the Ella Barnum case in Arkansas.
Yes, and of
A lot
course,
of people, yeah.
well, that's of course, Columbia is not very far from the Ozarks borderlands. It is outside the Ozarks,
Right.
but the potential of connecting that with the Ella Barham case does tie this, and of
Yeah.
course, then potentially, of course, all of this is speculative, but
It is
it does tie
but
the
as far as looking at, the series of axe murders in a short time period, and they all stopped when he got arrested for killing his mother and grandmother. And he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, and
yes.
there were no other similar cases after that. So it does make you wonder. And the situation with the Barham murder, a neighbor ended up being convicted of that murder and executed, but there were quite a few people, including people familiar with the case, that had doubts of whether or not he had done it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also, the railroad was very close by the murder site, and that murder was about 3 weeks before his mother and grandmother were murdered.
It's really pardon me. Marshmallow went down the wrong way. It's really chilling. Of course, this was in an era when, certainly in the Midwest, you did not lock your doors.
No.
A level of community trust that would be really unthinkable to us today, which is in and of itself a little sad. And yet it really adds such a I don't know, a core of unsettling horror to these, because it's done, these incredible atrocities being committed by, two people who literally, it would have been the last thing that they would have anticipated.
Yes, exactly. And there's just something very primal about dying that way. I mean,
Yeah.
I think just an axe as a weapon, and then using it as a bludgeoning weapon, not even a hacking weapon. Although some
Yes.
of them, like at Villisca, after the initial killings, there were a lot of blows and just mutilating the bodies, but it also indicated, the way it was done, the authorities felt indicated this was not someone that this was the first time they had done this either.
Yeah. Now, this is a little bit of an aside, but you mentioned the covering of the mirrors. It seems like I remember this, but I don't remember the details. Is there an occult practice in terms of mirror covering at the point of death?
Yes, well, the tradition was you cover you if there were any clocks in the house running, you would stop the clock when someone died, and you would cover mirrors because of spirits being able to go through mirrors. And so and I find in Villisca, the fact that they put a piece of glass in some of the cloth, I'm not aware of any folklore or superstition about that. Why that was done, I don't know. But covering mirrors is a very, and that's something that happened in some of these other cases as well. That the
Interesting.
mirrors would be covered and that kind of thing, and faces be covered with cloth. Um, so I mean, that part is almost an honoring situation, observing tradition, that kind of thing that doesn't fit a crime of passion or um, necessarily murder for hire. Like if the
Sure.
business rival had hired someone, I mean, it would be odd, I would think, that the murderer would have done that.
Absolutely. So coming back, you have a connection with the Villisca, with one of the Villisca investigations. Um,
Yes. Well,
what is
it
that, and
actually,
what is there?
well, and actually not even an investigation. This is what I find even more compelling about it. One of my best friends actually grew up about 10 miles from Villisca in a little town called Red Oak, Iowa. And the current owners have owned it since the mid 90s. Before that, it was a residence. And when she was a child, she knew a girl that lived there, and she had sleepovers there. And I mean, considering the amount of lore about the hauntings there, you think that's pretty amazing. But her her description is that basically, for one thing, if you're not familiar with the alleged hauntings, it's usually portrayed on TV and documentaries that the spirit of the murderer is there. And that's one
Right.
thing that she said, no, 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 that was never her impression or the people who lived there, that any activity there was the children. And it doesn't really make
Okay.
sense for the murderer to be there either. So, but
No.
one incident in particular is kind of chilling. She said they were there on a sleepover for a birthday party, and they were about 9 or
Mhm.
10. And she said that there were probably about eight little girls that were 9 or 10, and they started playing hide and seek. And one of the girls, they couldn't find her. They looked everywhere, and even got worried, told the mom and dad. They all start like they can't find her, and then they realize that she is in the closet, and it's a closet that some people speculate that the murderer may have stayed in for a little while.
Mhm.
That's disputed, but anyway, she's in this closet, and uh, they hear her, kind of whimpering and asking for help, and not screaming or anything, and they can't open the door. And she says she can't open the door, and there's no lock on the door. And the father ends up having to take the door off the hinges to get it open. And when they do, she's passed out and turning blue.
Mm.
They end up giving her CPR. But there's but
Wow.
but but it was not airtight. There was no reason that she wouldn't have her breath or anything, but she was extremely frightened, did not articulate, that she felt like there was a ghost there or something, but she had gotten very frightened and was really scared and didn't understand why she couldn't open the door, which none of them could understand.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then that is chilling.
Yeah.
It really is. Oh, very interesting. Well, I want to check that. I want to check it out now.
Oh yeah. I want to get there. I just have not gotten there yet, but yeah, we need to do that.
And I think about just a rough estimate, when abouts would that have occurrence been? It would have been prior to the 90s, correct?
Oh yeah, that would have been probably sometime in the early 80s, around 1980, somewhere in there.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, wrapping our heads around some of these things, and of course, prior to the internet, a lot of these locations did not develop their notoriety in a larger sense. And so it's would be one of those things that you could rationally understand that something bad happened there a long time ago, but from a rational Midwestern perspective, you would say, well, that really doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing now.
Right. But she does agree that there was activity. There were times that the people who lived there talked about it, and she had a little bit of experience that you would hear children singing. She said none of it seemed like they were scared or anything. It would be more like activity of children playing is what they experienced.
Yeah. It it reminds me just a little bit with the door, kind of a reverse of this, but my when my great grandmother was a child in southern Iowa, one of her friends lived in a house that, according to her friend, was haunted. And the situation was, it was an old 2-story house, and this was the coal mining area of Lucas County. And at the same time, every evening, if the door leading up to the second floor was closed, it would open. And and what was interesting, coming back to mentioning the clocks, that it would happen the same time every evening.
Now that's interesting. Those are the situations that I find interesting, because that would indicate it's not like a random draft, or if it was just a door that's slightly uneven, weighted evenly, it you wouldn't have that precision.
And one of the things that we oftentimes talk about, again, I guess this is our episode of no easy answers for ourselves. Something that we talk about is that you can't time your watch on paranormal activities. It happens when it happens. Who knows? You just have to develop a sense of awareness. But that this door would open, and you could set your watch by it. And it was, and my great grandmother, as a young girl, or early adolescence, saw it happen, experienced it. I think her friend had invited her over to watch it. I think that was the idea. I believe the door did have a lock on it. If they locked the door, it would unlock and open.
That's even more interesting.
And if they placed furniture in front of it to keep it from happening, it would push the furniture aside.
Oh wow.
And their conclusion ultimately was just to make sure that the door stayed open, and did not seem to be otherwise discomfited by the experience as a whole. They just realized that whatever it was that was there wanted the door open, so they made sure that it stayed that way, and it was what it was.
And my guess is, since it was so regular on a time, that it was tied to some event that happened at that time.
Yes, I would agree.
And of course, what it was that had to do with opening the door, who knows? But
Yeah.
those, I always love those situations. You find them every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
You
And and something that, I remember my great grandmother,
know?
and the thing that really stood out, of course, my mom knew her very well,
Mhm.
and she told the story to my mom, and it was not, the story was not passed on from a sense of, oh, let's scare somebody, or for the chilling effect of, any of that, or even a sensationalism. It was something that my great grandmother was a very no nonsense person. She was not particularly superstitious, and it was just something that she never forgot because she saw it happen.
Exactly. Well, and there is something to that. I mean, part of the issue we have now, I think, with the paranormal is we're so wound up in trying to prove that it exists, it doesn't, is this real, is this not, is this is this photo faked, or this or that, that we almost lose the point, and it's that experience.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree.
And that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. And it can be very primal. It can be very confusing. Another connection, and this isn't actually a ghost story. It's actually the absence of it. But when my mom was quite young, she and her sister and cousins, of course, this was the 1940s, rural coal mining country of southern Iowa, uh, pre-light pollution, and so when it's dark, it's really dark.
Yeah.
And they were all farm kids. And down the road from their from my mom's aunt's house, my great aunt and uncle's farm, was an old abandoned farmhouse, and the elderly man who had lived alone there had been murdered
Ooh.
in in the house. Someone had shot him in the back of the head while he was sitting in his chair.
Oh my.
They had very thoughtfully laid the body out and made sure that his head was over a nice big pan so he wouldn't bleed on the floor.
This kind of like Villisca a little bit, kind of weird behavior.
And they and left him there, and it was an unsolved murder.
Mm.
And so my mom, sister, and first cousins, on a relatively regular basis, would wait until it got pitch black dark and then go down to look for his ghost. And my mom said it was always really creepy, but they never found him, and they were always a little disappointed.
Well, sometimes it can be a mystery of, if there was going to be a haunting, you would think it would be that, but it's not. Either
But it's
that, or he decided he was going to haunt somewhere else.
so I think those are the two stories that come to my mind in terms of my growing up in southern. I did not grow up in southern Iowa, but my family's all from there.
Yeah. No, those are great stories. I love that, and I love the door. I really like that one.
That one, we talk about, especially we talk about clocks.
Yeah.
And the association with really I think an odd association with the paranormal as a death omen, and with the occult
Yeah.
connection with clocks, and we're not talking all of our digital clocks on our cell phones. We're talking about old real clocks, and I don't know what that means, but functioning on clockwork, like clockwork, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I I always took it as a commemoration of that moment. Of course, again, at those times, you didn't have that precision, and um, especially the way we do now with GPS, and everything's synced and everything, so you know exactly what time it is.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Before that, we had uh, time and temperature. You would actually call a number to see what time it was. Um, and so before that, you just had what that clock said, and that would be, they would stop that clock, and you know
Yeah,
and I've heard variously that you didn't start the clock again until after the funeral, or so many days, and that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. And I think, especially on some level, it speaks to the idea that the passage of one's spirit, or the leaving of one's soul, um, says something more than what our medical technology can say, and that there's some sort of resonance of
Yeah.
greater import that we really don't understand.
Well, and I don't know, in a way, it's another aspect that hits me with it is it's almost more modern version of the ferryman. Um, it's a way to mark that crossing.
Yes, I think that's important. I really do. And of course, the Ozarks are rife with a laundry list of death omens.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but now coming back, I think we're ready. Are we ready to?
I think let's give it a shot.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe we should explain our joke, because what happened on Instagram.
Yes, we just began talking about a dark, interesting subject, and um, you could no longer hear me.
Right. And actually it was almost like something from a movie, because the volume just went down. It wasn't
Yes,
just like that. It went down, and then suddenly, and then to the point I couldn't hear you at all.
and this is coming back to the author of the book that you mentioned. You were actually on a radio show.
Well, actually, yeah. Our it was the PSL podcast, and
Mhm.
some years ago, and this was when Stephen was researching and writing Confrontation with Evil. And I guess part of this is um, to set up. We mentioned earlier that the the priests were actually the ones who ended up with the sort of the ill effects,
Mhm.
suffering the effects of the exorcism, whereas the boy had no memory, and had went on to a very productive normal life. Um, Father Baldrin had his health deteriorated rapidly after the exorcism, and had health problems from then on, and some of the others did as well, including um, a young priest who had a lot of health problems, and could be construed as mental problems, that before long ended up basically being a resident at the hospital, the Alexian Brothers Hospital, and was cared for there for the rest of his life
Yes.
in one room. And which that's not something that's covered in the book, or the movie The Exorcist. Um, and in fact, it got to the point that the hospital stopped using that entire floor.
Now, is that hospital still there?
No, that wing of the hospital, it's not there anymore. And actually, the hospital now is called St. Alexius. So yeah, the area that we're talking about was torn down after Stephen went through it. But he said, basically, he was invited to go in by Jesuits, and he doesn't name names for their protection. But there had been a couple of accounts of people who worked in the hospital saying that, you know, this basically this floor didn't, it was like the 13th floor, it did not exist, you know. And that people who had been on the floor had had various experiences.
Yes.
He was taken in, and he only refers to his guide as Person X for their privacy. And he said you'd walk down the hall and you could see where they just left everything, you know, there were things sitting out. It's not like they cleared everything out. It was just like one day, okay, we're gone.
Wow.
And so at the end of the hall was the room that the young priest was kept there, and he stayed there until his death in the early 80s. And the room, they would physically seal the door when they would go in, and when they came out, they would seal it physically, and they sealed it with prayer. And of course, as you know, he said, you know, his thought always was, well, why? Okay, why? But he said, as you would walk down the hall, you could just feel this energy, feel this foreboding feeling. So anyway, he's on our podcast, and Stephen had been on several times, but he was in the middle of researching the book, and we get to the point where he's about to discuss what happened when he got to that room. And to give context, it was basically a three-way call. The show's producers in Texas, I'm here, and Stephen was in St. Louis, lived in St. Louis at the time. And so the producer had initiated the call and patched Stephen and I in. So I asked him, so what happened when you get to the room? And literally, as he's just starting to speak, we both hear this screeching noise on the line. And then the line is gone. We can't talk to the producer. The show's off the air, but somehow Stephen and I are still talking to each other.
Which isn't even supposed to be possible.
No, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, and so we've joked ever since then. Yeah, it just wasn't supposed to talk about that.
And there's a handful of aspects of lore that do seem to be associated with this. That there's taboo subjects.
Yeah.
That if one speaks about it, there is threats or warnings or concerns, or there will simply be the prevention of the discussion. And of course, Navajo tradition has this involving black magic.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot, and talking about these things, there's a lot of what I would consider to be benign paranormal.
Yeah.
And we've discussed that. Most of the cases that we've discussed, and many of the cases that we've been involved with, have fallen into that category.
Mm-hmm. And most do.
Yeah. The idea that it's easy to get into is that is all there is, and there isn't anything that is truly inhuman and malevolent.
Right. But that's not true either, you
No.
know. No. It's just that unfortunately, since The Exorcist, media has made it appear that it's much more common.
Yes. And of course, the conclusions with The Exorcist is not as chilling as the conclusion of the film is actually not as chilling as what is suggested by actual data.
Right.
Which, quite frankly, is that the demon or demons that had possessed this boy, when they were finally exorcised, went into a Jesuit priest who may have sacrificed himself,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Which would have been within his oaths, you know,
yes, yes,
and which you have to, you know, this would have been such a personal sacrifice, but also such a leap of his faith as well.
yes, it's heartbreaking, really.
It really is. And I guess, you know, I'll say that the Stephen's description of approaching that room was before, you know, before he got to the door, he could hear movement. He could hear things like sounding like things sliding across the floor, you know, or being thrown or whatever. And he walked up to it and it was still sealed. Um, and he said he put his hand on the door. He said you could just hear, almost sound like a whirlwind, you know, like a tornado in there with things swirling. And he put his hand on the door and almost instantly something flew and hit right on the other side of his hand, as if
Wow.
it was aware that he had put his hand
Mm-hmm.
there. And, you know, so take for what you wish of, but the indication of the data and some of the diaries involved were exactly that whatever possessed the boy transferred to the young priest, and basically he stayed at the hospital where they hopefully, I guess, could keep wraps on it. And once he died, I don't know, something was still going on in that room.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there was the reason it was still sealed. So
yes.
what happened after that, I don't know.
And of course, with a wide variety of traditions, root work comes to mind,
Mhm.
but that there's a wide variety of traditions that involve bindings.
Yes. And I, you know, my own impression was I think that's what was intended initially, was to
Mm-hmm.
exercise it and bind it. And the indication is instead it ended up possessing the priest.
Yes. Oh, which is downright terrifying when you really parse it out.
It really is. I mean, um, there are some things that you can't explain otherwise, perhaps. And, it, you know, maybe that is sort of the ultimate no easy answer case, that if that happened, it's, you know, the implications, you know, are rather scary. And,
Mm-hmm.
but if that, with that activities, it would, my inclination would be that somehow they did bind it then when the priest
Yes.
died.
It seems like that. It does bring up the question. I can't help but wonder what happened when they tore that wing down.
Well, I guess my assumption would be that somehow it was moved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Not something you want to call the U-Haul truck for.
No, no, I don't think that would be covered on their insurance policy. So for any damage.
Pardon me. We need
Something
to move a
under insurance.
demon. There's just not paperwork for that kind of thing.
No,
Or if there is, I may not want to know about it. I'm not sure.
exactly. That's a need to know basis.
Haven't discovered that section in the Yellow Pages.
No, and I don't want to really.
Probably not. Probably not. This is this is jumping subjects, and if we don't want to go there, that's fine. Have you, in your investigations, have you ever come across something that you felt like was leaning toward this type of thing?
Um, I mean, there's a couple of instances that I think there was something that wasn't human in origin, not necessarily demonic,
Yeah.
but perhaps something that had never been human. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's one thing too that has been lost in since the movie, and it's a testament to how good it was and how scary it was, is that it's not human and demon and that's all there is either, that there
Right.
are other possibilities.
Entities. Yes. Something that these days tend to get simply relegated into folklore and mythology.
Yes, but yeah, there's been a couple of times that it didn't fit that it was a human spirit, but I wouldn't say that it was demonic or necessarily evil. Might be a little, be a trickster, but no, I can say I don't think I've ever come across something that you could classify as demonic.
Okay.
And here's something that I hate to see. You do see it more than I would like to see it. Is that there are people who really purport that basically I've gotten rid of a demon every week type thing, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I don't know that that's helpful to portray things that way.
Correct. Yeah, and I would agree with that as well.
Yeah, I
It's
mean even exorcists for the church. I mean, it's not like they're doing an exorcism a week type thing.
mm-hmm. Right.
So that's something that aspect I do think still grows out of the movie, but gets
Yeah.
a distortion that's not helpful.
Mm-hmm. Very, very much so. But still chilling.
Yes,
and
certainly.
and we still apparently are able to communicate with the rest of the world. So
At least we're talking anyway.
right, right. I've still got the red live button so
I do too.
hopefully the rest of you all are with us. That seems like a pretty good place to close for this evening.
I think so. I do want to just say, anyone that is interested in this story further, whoops, helps if I turn it around. The book we're talking about is Confrontation with Evil by Stephen LaChance. And it's very good and very thought-provoking.
Yeah, of course I had the opportunity to read excerpts this afternoon in preparation for this episode. I'm looking forward. I'm going to get the book and encourage other folks to do as well. It's I want to read the rest of the story.
Yes, it's well worth the story. And it really makes a lot more sense when you read it all and then you contemplate the movie and the book. I mean, you think you have the full picture, but you don't.
And I'm really grateful that we have this record, in terms of, especially, the 60s and 70s, there was really such an inundation of large fiction novels that impacted pop culture in a variety of ways. The Godfather, of course, The Exorcist, pretty much every Stephen King novel that has ever been written.
Anne Rice,
And they're yeah, beginning with the Interview with the Vampire, and that these very what's the word? I don't want to use the word pulp. I mean, these aren't pulp works, but they're very sort of 70s 80s commercial works.
They are, but they've become icons in of themselves, and
Yeah, and they're quite good. I mean, I'm not saying that.
they're good, and yeah, some of my favorites. But
Mhm.
it does put a certain perspective on things that is not necessarily accurate for reality.
Right. And it comes back to something that we've discussed earlier, this kind of going off on maybe a conclusion, um, that I think much of the really successful pop culture genres or segments, not even genres, moments within pop culture have tapped into something very primal
Yes,
that we used to have. Again, that sense that American commercialism has taken our lore, taken our sort of our lore as a compass, uh, and taken that away from us and then sold it back to us. And
yeah, in a polished, sometimes watered down version, um, that looks good on film usually,
Mhm.
um, and then over time that becomes what people think the original lore is.
Yes, and that on one hand, I think the undercurrents of the story resonate on a primal level, which is why we are attracted to it, why it sticks in our minds, why we buy the product. But at the same time, our rational mind says this is all fiction.
And yes, this can't be. Yes,
Hmm. And
and
so, yeah, go ahead.
I'll saying this is a good example of yes, it can be.
Yes, and I'm really grateful for Stephen LaChance's work to document
Yes,
what is actually beneath the objective data that is beneath the pop culture reselling.
exactly, and that's what I love about this book, and it's rather eye opening. I really think that people who are interested in the subject, they really do need to read it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to get a copy, encourage you guys to get a copy. Of course, we're not getting paid to
No,
to tell people to do that. We just
no,
like the book and appreciate
exactly.
it. Yeah.
No, I know. I've just and we don't recommend a lot of books or products.
No, no, we
So
don't.
um, yeah, it's just a good product. It's worth buying.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's a good conclusion. This has been a kind of a trip,
It
this
really
particular episode.
it has, especially in the beginning over on Instagram.
I know. I'm just gonna chalk that up to Instagram being Instagram, but
Yeah, I think so. We'll leave it at that.
yeah. And of course we'll be back next Wednesday. We do encourage people to continue to like and share and follow and all of those social media buzzwords that people use. And of course comment and direct message us with your questions, with your comments, with your concerns, and with story ideas.
Exactly. And speaking of, I just want to do a shout out to everybody on the page that, you know, we we love the big response that we got this week on the Spooklight post. I mean,
Oh, no doubt.
reach is, just about 50,000 people, hundreds of comments and shares, and, lots of stories shared there. So you guys are great.
Absolutely. And of course, I mean, you and I love doing this just like this. But of course, the more that folks do share Dark Ozarks and follow along, tune in, watch the videos afterwards, because of course they are available, that all does help us move closer and closer to one of our goals, which is to, have Dark Ozarks as a series.
That's right. That's right. So your support helps get us, resuming production.
And of course, the thing I love is that this is fun to do
Oh yeah.
throughout the year.
Exactly. We get to talk about what interests us, and I'm just tickled that other people like it as well.
Oh, absolutely. We appreciate you all, and it just makes for great evenings, and sometimes gives us cool research to go do that we didn't know we wanted to go do. But
That's true. And yeah, we keep learning a lot more because of you all. So
yes,
keep it coming, and we'll be back next Wednesday. In between, everyone be safe with this storm coming through. So
yes, yep. Winter weather advisory. Be safe. Be responsible. Do not travel unless you have to.
exactly. But have fun.
And yes, that's the important thing.
And night all.
Night, everybody.